You're in the Navy? Let me guess. Your main job is posing for recruitment posters and filing paperwork. My husband's cousin, Travis, smirked, expecting me to shrink. Before I could answer, a sharp clink cut through the dining room. Grandpa Walter quietly set down his fork. The warmth vanished from his eyes. He locked onto Travis with a cold gaze. Son, you'd better be very careful what you say next. Travis's grin vanished. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer a defense. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. As a 32-year-old lieutenant commander and helicopter maritime strike pilot, my daily reality consisted of executing calculated decisions under immense pressure. Panic, desperation, and emotional outbursts were liabilities I had trained out of my system years ago. I simply sat there, feeling Justin, my 29-year-old civilian architect husband, squeeze my hand under the antique mahogany table. His silent, steadfast support was the only anchor I needed in a room full of performative noise. We were gathered at Grandpa Walter's historic coastal estate for Veterans Weekend. The estate was a sprawling, stoic property sitting on the rocky coastline, perfectly mirroring the 81-year-old retired Master Chief and Silver Star veteran who owned it. Walter was a man of immense physical and mental presence, preferring the language of direct action over empty, boastful words. Unlike Travis, who wore his dress uniform like a theatrical costume, I sat there in a simple civilian sweater, choosing to keep my career separate from family gatherings. He only knew I held an officer's commission, but his arrogance blinded him to the actual weight of my rank, assuming my quiet demeanor meant I had never left a desk. Travis had arrived 2 hours earlier, practically vibrating with the self-importance of a newly minted 27-year-old first lieutenant in Army logistics. From the exact moment he walked through the heavy oak doors, he had dominated the room with an exhausting, suffocating energy. He regaled my status-obsessed Aunt Kimberly and Uncle Donald with exaggerated, theatrical stories of routine training exercises, desperately trying to elevate mundane logistical drills into harrowing tales of battlefield supremacy. He treated civilian careers as punchlines, dismissing Justin's highly successful architectural firm as a cute hobby for people who simply couldn't handle the real world. Aunt Kimberly and Uncle Donald indulged his every word, inflating his ego until it threatened to suffocate the rest of us sitting at the table. But I knew the absolute truth about combat and service. True veterans, those who have actually faced the abyss and pulled others back from the edge of it, carry an invisible chain. It is a heavy, unbreakable chain forged from survivor's guilt, from the haunting faces of those we couldn't save, and from the heavy, silent burden of operational duty. We don't wear our service like a cheap costume jewelry accessory to impress relatives over roasted pheasant. We carry it quietly, deep within our bones. We understand that true leadership is measured by what you do when the sky is falling, not by how loud you can boast in a safe, climate-controlled dining room. I had watched Travis strut around the property, desperate for validation, wearing his pristine uniform not as a testament to sacrifice, but as a flimsy shield against his own glaring insecurities. He wanted to provoke a reaction from me. He desperately wanted me to become defensive, to engage in a petty inter-service rivalry that would validate his juvenile worldview. I refused to play his game. My silence wasn't submission. It was a tactical assessment. I was simply observing a junior officer humiliate himself, waiting for the inevitable moment he would cross a line he couldn't retreat from. I had spent countless hours hovering over churning, black oceans in an MH-60 helicopter, pulling desperate souls from the jaws of certain death. I had commanded strike teams where a single miscalculation meant returning with empty seats. The invisible chain of those true warrior experiences anchored me securely to reality. So, while Travis puffed out his chest and demanded the room's adoration, I simply took a slow, measured breath, maintaining my operational composure, fully prepared to watch him dismantle his own hollow kingdom. The dinner service continued with the presentation of the main course, but the atmosphere had grown suffocatingly tense. Travis, misinterpreting my clinical silence as an admission of weakness, decided to aggressively press his perceived advantage. He leaned heavily onto the polished table, swirling his expensive red wine in its crystal glass, and sneered directly at me across the floral centerpiece. Honestly, I don't even know why they call Navy deployments anymore. It's basically a paid luxury cruise, isn't it? You sleep in clean, climate-controlled beds, eat hot chef-prepared meals, and occasionally press a few buttons on a console. The Army does all the real gritty work on the ground while you guys enjoy the ocean breeze and collect a paycheck. Aunt Kimberly offered a shrill, supportive laugh, patting Travis's arm affectionately as if he had just delivered a stroke of genius. Well, someone has to do the heavy lifting for the country, darling, she cooed, casting a highly dismissive, condescending glance my way. Uncle Donald nodded enthusiastically, chewing his food, completely blind to the profound, blatant disrespect unfolding at his own father's table. Justin's jaw tightened dangerously. I felt him shift his weight in his chair, preparing to speak up, fully ready to passionately defend the countless sleepless nights I had spent deployed, the grueling tactical extractions, and the pervasive, lethal danger that hovered over every single maritime strike mission I flew. I pressed my hand firmly against his knee, a silent, commanding instruction to stand down and hold his fire. I didn't need rescuing, and engaging with Travis would only feed his desperate, ravenous need for attention. The hollow armor of insecure status is a fascinating psychological phenomenon. People who fundamentally lack true substance often build elaborate, incredibly fragile fortresses out of shiny titles, unearned ranks, and manufactured arrogance. They wrap themselves tightly in a fabricated cloak of superiority, genuinely believing that if they just shout loud enough and actively diminish those around them, no one will notice the echoing, cavernous void where their actual character should be. Travis's behavior wasn't a display of military strength. It was a glaring, high-definition broadcast of his own profound, deep-seated insecurity. His brand new lieutenant bars were heavy on his collar, but completely absent from his soul. He fundamentally needed to diminish my service to artificially elevate his own, a pathetic emotional transaction that only bankrupted his remaining dignity. He mistook my tactical, disciplined restraint for submission. He truly thought my refusal to engage was a silent admission of inferiority. Empowered by his parents' enabling applause and my continued stoic silence, he aggressively doubled down, completely abandoning whatever tiny shred of military professionalism he still possessed. I mean, look at you, Travis continued, his voice echoing loudly off the vaulted ceiling of the estate. A lieutenant commandé? You probably got that rank by organizing the best boardroom social events and keeping the coffee fresh. When I deploy next year, I'll be managing real assets, real lives. It takes a certain kind of raw grit that you just don't acquire sitting behind a desk filing digital flight logs. I truly looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing inside. There was no outrage, no urge to shout, no desire to justify my existence to a boy playing soldier. I had spent too many years enduring their toxic superiority. Tonight, I was done humoring his ignorance. I just kept my eyes locked on his, calculating the exact trajectory of his impending, catastrophic collapse. I didn't need to strike back. I simply needed to wait. Loud braggarts always mask deep insecurity, and his hollow armor was about to shatter permanently under the crushing weight of an irrefutable, devastating truth. The sharp clink of Grandpa Walter's silver fork against his porcelain plate had been the initial warning shot. But Travis, utterly blinded by his own hollow armor and bloated ego, had marched right past it. The dead silence that followed Travis's final insult wasn't just quiet, it was a total suffocating atmospheric vacuum. Walter slowly pushed his heavy dining chair back. The thick wood scraped harshly against the vintage floorboards, sounding exactly like a judge's gavel finalizing an absolute, unappealable sentence. At 81 years old, the retired Master Chief possessed a terrifying, coiled energy that demanded immediate submission. He didn't just command the room, He owned the very oxygen within it. Inner service rivalry. Walter began, his voice dangerously low, entirely stripped of any familial warmth or tolerance, is a long-standing tradition built on mutual, earned respect between individuals who have actually proven their salt in the field. What you are doing right now, Travis, is not rivalry. It is the pathetic, undisciplined whining of an unproven boy desperately trying to fill a uniform that is currently 10 sizes too big for him. Aunt Kimberly gasped loudly, her hand flying to clutch her pearl necklace in dramatic shock. Dad, he was just joking around. There's absolutely no need to. Silence. Kimberly, Walter snapped, cutting her off with surgical, ruthless precision. He didn't even turn his head to look at her. His cold, unwavering steel gaze remained securely locked onto Travis across the table. The young Army lieutenant was visibly deflating, the arrogant color rapidly draining from his face. The insufferable smugness completely evaporated, instantly replaced by the instinctual, primal terror of a subordinate realizing he had just profoundly disrespected a superior, apex predator. You talk about real assets, Walter continued, his tone clinical, methodical, and purely transactional. You talk about real lives on the line. You speak with the unearned authority of someone who has read about war in a training manual, not someone who has actually smelled the burning fuel and blood. Stand up, First Lieutenant. It wasn't a polite request. It was a sovereign, absolute command from a decorated combat veteran. Travis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and awkwardly pushed himself up from the table. His hands were trembling slightly at his sides as he snapped to rigid attention, reverting entirely to basic training survival instincts under the crushing, suffocating weight of the patriarch's glare. Go into my private study down the hall, Walter ordered, enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp clarity. Above the stone fireplace, you will find a locked, brass-bound walnut sea chest. Next to it, there is a heavy blue naval dossier resting on the mantelpiece. You will bring both of those items back to this dining table right now. Do you explicitly understand me? Yes, sir, Travis stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. He practically stumbled over his own feet as he executed a rigid turn and marched quickly down the long, shadowed hallway toward the study. The dining room remained paralyzed in an agonizing, frozen silence. Uncle Donald stared blankly at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his untouched asparagus spears. Justin kept his hand firmly over mine, his thumb tracing a steady, reassuring pattern against my skin. I simply watched the empty doorway, my pulse perfectly steady, my breathing entirely even. This wasn't revenge. It was strict accounting. Travis had racked up an enormous, unsustainable debt of disrespect, and Walter was finally about to force him to balance the ledger. I felt no pity for the boy trembling in the hallway. I felt no sorrow for my aunt and uncle's impending public humiliation. I was merely sitting back, waiting for the final, itemized receipt to be presented. 2 endless minutes later, Travis reappeared in the doorway. He was actively sweating, awkwardly balancing the heavy, brass-bound walnut sea chest in his trembling arms, the thick blue naval dossier resting precariously on top. He walked back to the dining table, his hollow armor completely stripped away, leaving only a terrified, deeply insecure man about to face a tribunal he had stupidly, arrogantly summoned himself. Travis carefully set the heavy, brass-bound walnut sea chest and the thick blue dossier down on the exact center of the polished mahogany dining table. He wiped a nervous bead of sweat from his forehead and forced a weak, incredibly sycophantic smile, desperately trying to salvage whatever tiny fraction of dignity he had left. Here you go, Grandpa, Travis said, his voice dripping with forced hollow admiration. I've always deeply admired your medals. A Silver Star is an incredible achievement. The Army always respects true combat veterans. I'm honestly honored you want to show me your service record tonight. Walter didn't smile. He didn't acknowledge the pathetic flattery. He simply reached into his front pocket, produced a small, worn brass key, and clinically unlocked the chest. The heavy wooden lid creaked open. Inside, resting perfectly on dark blue velvet, were two pristine, highly distinguished military decorations: a navy cross and a purple heart, flanked by a gleaming set of gold naval aviator wings. "These do not belong to me," Walter said, his voice echoing like cracking ice across the room. "I earned my silver star in the jungles of Vietnam. These specific decorations were earned exactly 3 years ago. When the mission was declassified, Lauren entrusted her citations and medals to me for safekeeping, honoring our family's unbroken line of service." Travis looked genuinely confused, his eyes darting frantically from the medals in the chest to Walter's stoic face. "Then, whose are they?" Walter smoothly slid the blue naval dossier across the table, stopping it directly in front of Travis's trembling hands. "Open the file. Read the official citation printed on the very first page. Read it aloud, Lieutenant, and do not skip a single word." Travis hesitated, his hands shaking violently now as he grasped the edge of the folder. He flipped open the heavy cover. He cleared his throat, his wide eyes scanning the dense, official military type. "For extraordinary heroism," Travis began, his voice wavering uncontrollably, while serving as flight lead and aircraft commander of an MH-60 tactical element during a highly classified nighttime extraction along the Red Sea coast. He paused, swallowing hard, the reality of the text beginning to register. Despite heavy, sustained anti-aircraft artillery fire and near-zero visibility conditions, the aircraft commander deliberately descended into a hostile, active combat zone, successfully executing a hover hold over a compromised, heavily pinned down Allied position. I sat completely motionless, my face a carefully constructed mask of unyielding stone. I didn't need to look at the medals in the box. I could still clearly feel the phantom, burning ache in my left shoulder where the jagged shrapnel had hit. I could still vividly hear the deafening, mechanical roar of the helicopter rotors and the frantic, desperate radio chatter of the trapped soldiers begging for air support. The aircraft commander sustained severe shrapnel wounds during the rescue operation. Travis read, his voice dropping to a horrified, breathless whisper, but maintained absolute, unwavering flight control, explicitly refusing medical evacuation until all 16 trapped Allied personnel were fully secured and safely extracted from the active kill zone. Walter leaned forward, his cold eyes burning straight through Travis's rapidly crumbling facade, read the recipient line at the signature block, "Son." Travis's trembling finger moved to the official authorization seal at the bottom. He stopped breathing entirely. All the remaining blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Awarded to Lieutenant Commander Lauren Vance, he choked out, his voice shattering under absolute shock. He looked up at me, then back at the gold seal, his entire reality collapsing. "Keep reading," Walter commanded mercilessly, offering 0 quarter. Read the specific designation of the military unit she pulled out of that hellhole. Travis's eyes scanned down to the operational details listed at the bottom. When he read the unit designation aloud, he physically stumbled backward, his hip hitting the hard edge of a dining chair. His mouth opened wide, but no sound came out. The 16 desperate men I had pulled from that pitch-black, fire-torn coastline along the Red Sea exactly 3 years ago belonged to the 2nd Battalion, 14th Infantry Regiment. It was Travis's own active deployment unit. The very comrades he was just boasting about leading next year were only alive today because the naval desk clerk he was ruthlessly mocking had flown her aircraft straight into a meat grinder to secure their safe return. The revelation hit the dining room like a targeted kinetic strike. Travis stood absolutely paralyzed, his eyes locked onto the blue dossier as if it were a live, ticking explosive. The sickening, undeniable realization washed over him in real time. He had spent the last hour aggressively degrading and publicly humiliating the exact naval officer whose blood, tactical precision, and unwavering courage had personally secured the safe return of his own brothers in arms. Aunt Kimberly and Uncle Donald sat in a mortified, suffocating silence. Their previous insufferable smugness was entirely eradicated, instantly replaced by the profound, crushing shame of realizing they had enthusiastically applauded their son's profound ignorance and disrespect. The sovereign vindication of quiet competence is an absolute, undeniable force. It fundamentally doesn't require loud, defensive arguments, aggressive shouting, or messy emotional outbursts. True justice isn't about enacting petty, dramatic revenge. It is the ultimate, inevitable harvest of cold, undeniable facts. I had planted the deep seeds of my legacy in the dark, terrifying, tracer-lit skies over the Red Sea. I hadn't flown that mission for shiny medals, and I certainly hadn't shed blood to win petty arguments at holiday family dinners. I did it because true leadership and operational competence demand immediate, decisive action when human lives are on the line. Now, that quiet competence had grown into an impenetrable, towering fortress. The truth stood sovereign and absolute in the room, completely dwarfing Travis's performative, hollow arrogance and rendering his entire manufactured identity obsolete. Walter stood up, his posture rigid, commanding, and radiating military authority. "You deeply disgraced this table," Walter stated, his voice a low, lethal hum that commanded total silence. "You disgraced the United States uniform you wear. You deliberately insulted an officer of superior rank, vastly superior combat experience, and unquestionably superior character. You mocked the very shield that protected your own unit from annihilation. I demand a formal, direct military apology." Right now, Travis was completely, fundamentally broken. The hollow armor had not just shattered, it had been entirely vaporized by the searing heat of reality. He turned slowly toward me, his hands trembling visibly at his sides, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw a single, steady breath. There was absolutely no arrogance left in his eyes, only raw, unadulterated, devastating shame. Tears welled up rapidly, spilling over his pale cheeks as the full, crushing weight of his disgraceful, juvenile behavior finally broke him. Lieutenant Commander Vance, Travis choked out, his voice cracking into a ragged, pathetic sob. He forced himself to stand at rigid attention, though his knees looked ready to completely collapse under him. I am so profoundly sorry. I was arrogant. I was incredibly ignorant. I deeply disrespected you, your dedicated service, and the extreme sacrifices you made for my battalion. I am deeply, deeply ashamed of myself, ma'am. I beg for your forgiveness. I looked at him, feeling the absolute clarity of the moment. I didn't smile, and I didn't offer a warm, comforting, familial platitude. I maintained my strict clinical composure, coldly assessing the broken, weeping man standing before me. Apology accepted. "Lieutenant," I said, my voice steady, cold, and decisively calm. "But you will remember this moment. True leadership isn't about the volume of your voice or the shiny rank pinned on your chest. It is entirely about operational discipline, personal sacrifice, and the quiet resolve to do what is necessary when nobody is applauding. You have a massive amount of growing up to do before you are fit to lead those men in the field. Do not fail them." Travis nodded frantically, tears streaming continuously down his face, completely humiliated and permanently humbled by the cold, unyielding reality of his own inadequacy. The family power dynamic hadn't just flipped, it had been permanently and decisively rewritten. Exactly 10 minutes later, Travis quietly excused himself from the coastal estate. He didn't say a formal goodbye to his parents. He just walked straight out the heavy front doors, his head bowed low, carrying the crushing permanent weight of his newly acquired self-awareness. Aunt Kimberly and Uncle Donald remained seated at the table, picking nervously at their cold, untouched food in agonizing silence, entirely stripped of their usual self-important, status-obsessed chatter. Grandpa Walter calmly reached out, closed the heavy lid of the walnut sea chest, and firmly locked it. He slipped the small brass key back into his pocket, picked up his silver fork, and met my gaze directly across the length of the table. For the very first time all evening, the hard, disciplined lines around his mouth softened. He offered me a single, slow, deeply proud nod. The tribunal was officially over. The emotional balance sheet was perfectly settled. The remainder of the evening passed in a serene, sovereign peace. As I sat there, feeling Justin's hand resting warmly and steadily on my shoulder, I realized the profound, permanent shift that had just occurred. For years, I had allowed myself to be the silent investor in their twisted version of family, quietly footing the emotional bill while they paraded their deep insecurities masked as superiority. But tonight, I had permanently foreclosed on that toxic account. The illusion of loud arrogance is always fragile and temporary, but the permanence of quiet competence is absolute and eternal. To anyone listening who has ever felt like they were on the fringes of their own family, who has been mocked, diminished, or made to feel entirely invisible by loud, arrogant bullies, hear me now. You do not need to shout to prove your worth. You do not need to engage in their petty battles or wear your accomplishments like a cheap badge to validate your existence. Your character is built in the quiet, unseen moments of endurance. Your strength is forged in the intense fires of your private battles. When you know exactly who you are, what you have survived, and what you are capable of, the hollow insults of insecure people become nothing more than irrelevant background noise. I've come to realize that you don't need to aggressively destroy the people who try to belittle you. You simply need to stand firmly, immovably in your own truth and let their fragile lies shatter against the impenetrable wall of your reality. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free from their constant noise, allowing you to walk away with your dignity absolutely intact. You owe no one an explanation for the quiet strength you carry within you. What would you have done if you were sitting at that table? Have you ever watched someone get completely humbled by cold, undeniable facts? Share your thoughts below. Pass this story to someone who needs to hear the power of quiet strength. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys of truth and justice.